we have time for a few questions.
I was just wondering what your favourite song was while you were...
Do you want me to tell you honestly?
Yes.
This is horrendous. But
you gave us a big speech about honesty. So.
I've got my daughter is 4.5. So before we went out, she'd had a birthday. And on iPod, if anyone that's got kids, right, you go on iTunes, you can download like 100 Disney songs, right? Yeah, it's getting worse, right? But so I did that for this party. You put it in the speakers, and away you go. What we used to do was we'd ski for 9 hours a day, but you'd ski for 2 hours, stop for 10 minutes, have sort of foods and water and all the rest of it, then you'd ski for 2 hours again. So what you'd do is you quickly get your iPod out, put it onto an album that you wanted, put it away, and away you go. You've got no time to mess about. Minus 48, your hands are going to freeze. I don't know how I did it, right? But I flicked it onto the album that was Disney music, right? And it was the last 2 hours of the day. And because you got massive gloves on, I couldn't stop because you'll get left behind. I had Disney music on for 2 hours. And I swear it drove me mental. So I'm staying in a tent with this guy who's missing a leg, Guy Disney. And we get in the tent, and no joke, it was that bad, right? I mean, I like The Lion King more than most, you know, it's great, I can take it or leave it, but get in the tent, and he's like, oh, how was today, mate? I went, oh, I couldn't Matata, mate. And he was like, what? Honestly, it was horrendous, like, I was totally, like, you know, in the zone there, like, I was Disneyed out big time. If I hear Disney music now, it just, like, sends me wild, like, I can't stand it, like, it's horrible. But that genuinely did happen, like, it was horrible. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you my favourite song, because it'll be, like, completely cheese, like,
So what is your next big thing, then, after that amazing expedition?
One thing I left out of that was it was supposed to be a race, and because some people had sort of suffered with frostbite and all these sort of things, it was quickly going from a race to like the retreat from Stalingrad. You know, there was like bodies everywhere. It was horrendous. And what they did was when we crossed the first degree line, so we did the first 100 kilometers, they basically stopped the race, and they said, right, we're just going to go ahead as one big group. I trained for like anyone here that's sort of trained for anything or like sort of done anything sort of where you're really focusing yourself. If you imagine that like the goalposts sort of at the time where you've like got to that point just totally change, you're going to be quite disappointed. You know, I trained for like a year like a lunatic to make sure I was fit enough to be part of a team to get out there, and all of a sudden they said like, do you know what, all change, I'm afraid. And although I like to embrace change, I wasn't too happy with the fact that they'd been the race. So me and this other bloke, Guy Disney, I was in the tent with, went back to the tent, and the British team was sponsored by Glenfiddich, and they'd given us quite nicely a couple of bottles for when times got bad, and that to me was a bad time. So we sort of started, you know, and we're drowning our sorrows in the tent because we had 24 hours to sort ourselves out. And we come up with a plan, and what we're going to do is probably next year, we're going to go to Greenland, and if you went north to south or south to north, it's about 1,200 kilometres, and it was quite rough ground, some parts of it. But we watched a documentary about these guys that they kind of skied and kited it. You know, if you get a big enough kite, you can propel yourself along. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that next year. We're going to go and do 1,200 kilometres across Greenland and get that done, because we don't know any other disabled guys or amputees that have done it, which is probably an indication that you shouldn't do it, but you know, we're gonna, what's the worst that could happen? So we're going to give that a bash, and I'm going to do the London Marathon in April as well, because I really woosed out of that last year, because Virgin Money were one of the major sponsors for the expedition. Obviously they do the marathon, don't they? And they asked us if we'd do it, and so I got the running blades and all that sort of stuff, and I didn't look, well, I was going to say Oscar Pistorius, don't mention that name, but you know, obviously I'm not him. But they, although we did stop in South Africa, and believe it or not, someone came up to me and said, are you Oscar Pistorius? Nah, I don't think so, mate. But so what we're going to do is they kept me a place for next year. I couldn't do it last year. I hurt my back when they made the running blades. They made one of my legs a little bit too short, hurt my back, totally wimped out, and they said, right, what about next year? So I'm going to crack that next April, and then I'm going to hopefully go to Greenland and do that as well. So that should be quite good, really. But you can't dine out in the South Pole forever, can you? It's been done, old news. But yeah, never mind. Cheers. Thanks.
I have a quick question. I'm listening to your journey and your story. it's fascinating, the parallel between engagement, culture, working in an organization. At what point did you know that you had mastered these dark voices that I talked about, and you were on top of the game?
Well, I think, bear in mind, I don't usually talk about this sort of stuff, but basically, when the day I was injured, I'll just quickly sort of mention it. If you imagine driving along a road in a convoy of 13 vehicles, I was the last vehicle, so unlucky for some. And when I was blown up, all the guys in the vehicles are like, they can't just jump out and start sorting out the injured vehicle. They've got to check that there's no bombs and all the rest of it around them. They're going to go off when they get the vehicles. And then, unfortunately, it was followed up by an ambush. So the vehicles are all getting shot at, and the guys are fighting an ambush because that's more dangerous than some bloke like me lying in a chair sort of broken. That's more sort of life-saving, if you imagine. At the time, I was in well, probably the most amount of pain. I know pain's relative, because obviously if pain wasn't relative, women would not go and have another child after childbirth, would they? As my wife has told me many times. But she always says childbirth's a lot more painful than you getting blown up. So I don't know how she got that one, but yeah, brings up the fact I never went to the scans either. But whatever. That was a particularly bad time, right? So I was in the most amount of pain I've ever been in my life. All the kit that I could have had on me to save my life, so tourniquets, morphine, my body armour, everything had been blown off me completely. I had no weapons on me to defend myself, and it was just like a really scary time in my life, to be quite honest. I'm not too proud to admit the fact that had I had a pistol on me, I think with the amount of pain I was in, something that I've visited many times in sort of dreams and the rest of it, I'd have probably finished myself off, because I thought I was in that much pain. And felt like an eternity, a long time, I couldn't breathe because I broke all my ribs and my chest wasn't sort of inflated until I managed to roll out of this chair. I couldn't breathe, and I was lying there thinking, how long does it take to bloody die? Like, because you watch it in a film, you think, that's done, but life isn't a film, is it? And I remember lying there thinking, God, I'm not going anywhere here. I'm sort of sticking with it. And that was kind of the source of my, bit deep like, but that was the source of my PTSD. That kind of followed me all the way through, and that was my biggest bugbear, my biggest demon. And the one thing I think that the South Pole did to me was about, I think at the point when we got to the South Pole and someone came up to me and said, oh, do you realise you're the only double amputee ever to get to the South Pole? It was something that I'd blown off completely every time that someone's ever mentioned it. But when I got there and I thought, yeah, like, I've come a long way since that day. If I pick that day as like the worst day of my life and then pick the day I got to the South Pole, I think that's the day that I really rubbed out that memory and thought, do you know what, it was just a bad time of my life. And I think that was the day when I literally got to the South Pole. But it wasn't as a group, it was kind of myself, when I got there on my own, and kind of, a bit cheesy like, but like I kind of like reached out and I touched the old pole. My hand didn't stick to it, but I had gloves on. But and I kind of thought, yeah, I've made it. I'm one of only a few people to ever make it here, because it's such a big deal getting there. And if it wasn't for more good people than bad in my life, I would never have got out of a wheelchair. I'd have never got out of hospital. I'd have never been put on a stretcher and helicoptered out of where I was injured. So it kind of gave me a lot of faith in humanity, to be honest. And I'm not saying I'm about to burst into song, but I was I can do a bit of Mulan, but I think that was the day, to be honest. Yeah.
Any other questions?
How do you sustain that feeling that you got that at that one point? How do you keep that motivation going for you?
A lot. Thanks for the question. I think a lot of it is, everyone's probably been in a position where you're like an underdog, and I don't mean that nobody thinks you're ever going to produce anything positive again, but I hope I'm not blowing my own trumpet in a way that when I was in the military, I always felt I was doing all right. I always felt like, this is not too much. This is good. I suppose, in my comfort zone, embarrassingly enough. Maybe I wasn't doing enough to take myself out of that. And when I was injured, I went from being into massively out of my comfort zone, where I had to prove everything constantly. Where even just going around the wards in my wheelchair, people were saying, well, we don't think you can do that right now. And beforehand, running 15-20 miles was a bit of a joke. It was easy. So I went from one extreme to the other, and it was almost like going back to school, where you've got to prove everything. And when before I went to South Pole, someone said to me, do you want to cycle Land's End to John O'Groats? It was about 8 months after I was amputated, and I didn't want to back out, because blokes are bloody stupid by design in a way, but they're like, oh, I'm not backing out in this one. My mate said we'll do it, and we went and did it, and it kind of just lit a fire that everyone said to me, you are never going to be able to cycle 1,000 miles. That is just impossible. And I thought, nah, it's got to be possible. And I kind of relished the fact that you could prove people wrong just by pushing through a little bit and sort of pushing hard. And I think for some reason people's expectations drop when you're not just injured, but I think if you're in remission from cancer or you're a cancer, you name it, you go through a bad period in your life where it takes you out of the norm into that sort of grey light where people think, oh, we don't think they're probably capable of that. And you're fighting every day to prove, yeah, I am capable, I can still do this, I can do that, I can do the next thing as good as you can. And I think it's just that. So I'm just not willing to give up, because I think, well, you can do it, it is possible, so just push on. But, yeah. Cheers.
First of all, thank you for the talk this evening. I've really enjoyed it, very much so. It was just a question really about your recovery, and I was just curious, listening to you, it sounds like being physically active was a key component in getting past trauma and getting through things. But I'm also curious to know what you felt and what you saw with your colleagues about talk therapy. Did you find, what was the role in that in recovery when you were sitting in the hospital, and what value did you place on it and your colleagues place on it?
Cheers, thanks. I think, I hate to say it, because I would never ever demean the military, because they've looked after me massively. They have. I would never have sort of survived without them. But they're behind on therapy, on, whatever you want to say, post-traumatic stress disorder, or anything psychological. I think they're behind on. But I think now more than ever, they're more open to the fact that actually they need to be up to speed on it. And in 2009, when you go to rehabilitation, they don't go near you in the hospital. They don't ask you any questions. It's purely on how you are medically. When you go to rehabilitation, they basically, it's almost like a checklist. They check you out and ask to determine whether you're suffering from sort of mild depression to full-blown PTSD, whatever it may be. Because some people, they don't have to be physically injured to suffer from it. We all know that. But there wasn't a lot of help, and I was personally, I'm not saying this was for everyone, but I was pushed from pillar to post. I was quite open to asking for help. I thought, this is just something, your body can get injured, so can your mind. It's not embarrassment. I had, again, back to being a commander, I had guys come up to me telling me they couldn't sleep, they couldn't do this, and they couldn't do the next thing, and it was the onset of PTSD, so it wasn't completely strange to me. But what was the fact that as much as you'd ask for help, it was more, well, take this medication then, this will help you. And it's like, well, that's not, how does that stop it? It's like taking paracetamol, but it can only do so much. And it was only afterwards, when guys like me would speak to other guys that had PTSD, that we'd actually get to some sort of point about it, and I think now they're kind of really investing, but I really wish when I was going through that they'd have one person to stick with you and almost mentor you through it. Maybe someone that had PTSD that had recovered, or they're a little bit better than you, to take you through it and show you, do you know what, you're going to have a bad day, but your bad days will become okay days, and then you'll forget what the bad days are like because they'll all be all right days. You know, just like anyone, and there wasn't enough of it, and I think that's one thing that the military really, really struggle on, because in the military, if you went down to your local medical centre on camp and said, "Do you know what, I'm suffering nightmares, I think I've got PTSD," you're never going to get promoted. You are out of the line, you're out of your job, and you're off in this box of people that, oh, we're not sure what to do with them, but you know, they can't go near weapon systems, they can't go near anything, where it's a really strange subculture that they've got, and that needs to change, because it's not something that's going to happen for the rest of life, and it's only through, I guess, having it and going through it and sort of having quite a lot of bad days with it, I suppose, that I now know that. But you know, I think that's something that they're really behind on, that hopefully they're going to get a grip of it sooner rather than later, because you know, there's a legacy there, isn't there? It takes a while to come to the surface, but you know, I hope that kind of answers it in a way. Cheers, thanks.